Hello, Bill Molyneux here for another video for Black History Month, and I'm here at Fort Frederick with Park Ranger Robert Ambrose. Robert, what are you going to talk to my viewers today about?
Well, I've got a lot of different stories I'd like to tell today, but right now I'd like to kind of give a little bit of a story that people ask, and it really isn't, the answer is we don't know, but I kind of want to set the stage about some of the stories of African Americans here potentially in the 18th century. So I start here at our exhibit on the fort about the construction of Fort Frederick. And people ask us a lot of times, were enslaved people used for labor at Fort Frederick? The answer is we don't know. End of story. But we want to tell you that professional builders were overseeing the construction of the fort using some of our tools and building this massive fort behind us. There is, because they are lost to time, because they may have been enslaved, we don't know who they were if they were here. But there is a potential that people that helped build this fort were African American enslaved people, and even potentially indentured servants or freedmen. We don't know that, because the records just don't exist. But it is absolutely possible that there could have been some, particularly with the distances that some of the professionals are coming from out to Western Maryland to help build this fort. So we don't know if they were here, but we can't say they weren't. And we'd love to uncover, it would be a real great addition to our story if we could find that information. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Now, also back to the 18th century story, and we will talk more about this family later, but Nathan Williams, who owns the fort in the 19th and early 20th century, him and his family, they say through their family history that in 1763, during Pontiac's Rebellion, his grandmother was one of the 700 refugees that was here at the fort. I don't know her name, we don't know her status, more than likely she was enslaved, based on the fact that the rest of the family was enslaved later, but she may have been here as a refugee in the 1760s. So I want to move on to the Revolution a little bit. Again, another interesting story that sometimes people ask. Actually, Bill himself just asked a little bit ago. He says, were there any black prisoners here at Fort Frederick? And the answer I can probably give you is pretty resounding no. And the reason it's no is because in 1781, the Americans captured two British privateer ships, basically pirates with permission. And they take the crews, and they're in Annapolis, in jail, and they are some bad hombres, bad characters. And they want to send them as far away from the water as they can, so they send them to Fort Frederick. But before the prisoners leave, there is a letter that says there were several, in quotes here, Negroes with them. We don't want you to send them to Fort Frederick. We will dispose of them here. What they mean by dispose of them, they were probably enslaved people that joined the crew because these privateers were raiding the Chesapeake Bay, raiding houses, raiding farms, raiding plantations. So they probably joined the crew that way. And in Maryland's mind, were property of someone else, and they needed to be returned to their masters. So they weren't brought to Fort Frederick, but we know that there were several captured during that time, and it ties directly into our story because the rest of the crew was brought to Fort Frederick. So were there any African American prisoners here during the American Revolution? Very, very minimal chance of it, because the majority of them are going to be people who have run away from their masters, from their enslavers, and have joined the British forces. So when they are captured, they are going to be, by the colonial forces of America, returned to their previous state of bondage. It's an unfortunate situation, but it is the way that it was. So as we move over a little bit, just real quick, we're going to also, today, most of our stories we're going to tell are going to be about the Williams family. And this is Nathan Williams, and Nathan Williams and his family, well, him and his wife had been enslaved, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later. But just to give you an idea that this family is here from 1850 through almost until Fort Frederick becomes a state park. They're here during the Civil War, and they end up selling the property in 1911, and 10 years later, Fort Frederick becomes a state park. So they are the longest private owner of the fort, and they own it They're the second longest owner of the fort. If you take Fort Frederick as a colony ownership of Maryland and the state of Maryland, and its two ownerships, we are the longest owner of the property, but the Williamses are so ingrained in that 19th and early 20th century story. And we're going to go talk a little bit more about them, where their house was, and we're going to talk about their role in education and also some stuff that happened to them during the American Civil War.
All right, well, thank you.